People who went to a wedding where the couple didn't last long? What happened? During the reception, the bride's niece accidentally knocked over a drink that splashed the bride's shoes, and she backhanded her in front of everyone. It caused a huge fight, and the groom walked out right then. The bride and groom got married, and within 3 months, the bride found out the groom was married and had kids in a different country. My cousin, female/bride, was dancing too much at the reception, so the groom hit her. My uncles gave him a ride to the hospital, which he needed very badly by the time he got there. It was annulled pretty quickly. They were both 35, successful lawyer and doctor, but had never spent the night at each other's house. After the marriage, they couldn't agree who would move in with who, and filed for divorce after 3 months. No one knows why they even got married at all. I guess they felt like they were supposed to at that age. The wedding was beautiful, and the most expensive wedding I have even been to. The bride worked for a fashion designer in NYC and had 3 different dresses she wore during different parts of the wedding. They announced she was pregnant soon after the wedding, and unfortunately scans showed there were a few things wrong with the baby. The stress of the situation caused my cousin, the husband, to relapse and go back to his old heroin habit, which apparently she had no idea about. His drug use quickly spiraled, and he got fired from his job for stealing, and then his wife found out about it all and moved out to stay with her parents. Baby was born 100% healthy. Scans had got it wrong. He tried to quit drugs and make amends to her, but it was rocky, and she divorced him before their first anniversary. He dipped off for a few years doing drugs, then got sober and found out he had brain cancer. Relapsed, got sober again, and had his brain tumor removed. Now he is still sober and remarried, has a few kids with his new wife. The bride came out to Slipknot. They wrote their own vows, which were, shall we say, overtly and uncomfortably sexual, and they had been dating for a grand total of 2 whole weeks. Any and all attempts to inform them that this was a mistake were met with, when you know, or you're just jealous. But hey, a free bar is a free bar. Edit, so many questions. The song was the last bonus track on Subliminal Verses. I'm told this track is called Danger, Keep Away. The wedding itself was a small thing with a registrar and a council building. The staff there were very professional and only laughed quietly. The after-party was at a pub owned by the groom's uncle. The honeymoon was at Butlin's. They were separated by the time they got back. They were not in the military, just young dumb. We are all white trash, and that's fine. I bought them a toaster from Argos. I didn't ask for it back. I attended a wedding of total strangers at an anime convention once. It was Resident Evil themed. The bride even came out to the RE soundtrack. The groom was dressed as an Umbrella Corp security forces, I guess. The bride was dressed in Hot Topic shit and cat ears and tail. The bridal party were in shitty cosplay, and the groomsmen were just wearing whatever. It was so embarrassing. The officiant looked like he wanted to crawl into a hole and die, or drink until he forgot he did that. This is the most anime convention thing I've ever read. Every single one fits the stereotype. They're exactly what you expect. Actually, I performed a wedding at a local bar. We left about 10 p.m. The newlyweds got drunk, started fighting, and were arrested, spending the night in jail. My brother got married to a woman from Russia while in the army. The whole family thought she married him for a green card, but he was convinced it was love. They had their ceremony in a gazebo on a military base. It was a small gathering of family that traveled to it from out of state. His best friend since high school got ordained just so he could marry them. My brother was really excited. He wore a nice suit, and the bride, well, she showed up in a bright pink tracksuit. They divorced a year later. Saw some signs at the wedding, like ignoring each other, making rude and snide remarks publicly, etc. They tried to fix their marriage by having a kid earlier than they planned, and that led to divorce. Both are married to different people now and have had more kids, by all accounts far more civil, even cordial with each other. Groom went missing between ceremony and reception. Bride found him banging the best man in the toilets. She smashed a glass in his face. I didn't actually attend the wedding. During lockdown, when we were working from home, this one colleague was always reluctant to have work-related one-to-one calls with male colleagues such as myself. Eventually, I found out that her fiance would moan and get jealous that she was talking to other men on Teams, even if it was 100% professional and work-related. Even then, I thought, whoa, but figured it wasn't my place to say anything. They got married about 2 years ago. About 9 months ago, he asked for a divorce by text as he, Mr. Jealous, had found someone else. When they're that paranoid, it's usually because they are cheating. They'd try to get with a coworker who's just trying to innocently do their job, so they expect everyone would. Both my brother and sister had short marriages. Sister. Husband turned up to the wedding high on crack. She fell in love with someone else. Brother. Had a destination wedding on the top of a mountain that took half a day for the guests to hike, including my dad, who is missing a kneecap. They wound up with an open marriage, but the wife ran off with the other guy and their cat. Didn't go to the wedding, but did go to the bachelorette goodbye party. We were in college. She was 19, from a super conservative family. Her longtime boyfriend visited her once and was terrible. Wouldn't talk to anyone, basically sulked the whole time. He clearly hated that she was in school. When he proposed, her parents pulled the plug on college tuition because she didn't need it anymore. So she dropped out at the end of her freshman year, moved back to Central California, and got married to the shithead. I never saw her again. But from what I've seen on Facebook, she finally dumped him in her mid-20s, moved across the country to get away from her family, and was working restaurant jobs while trying to get a degree. We're in our 30s now, and she still seems pretty angry about everything she missed out on and how she was treated, but she's living her life on her own terms. Not a happy ending, but I'm happy for her. Went to Singapore to attend a female friend's wedding with a Singaporean guy. She'd been so happy up until the actual wedding. My friends and I arrived like 3 days before the ceremony, and the wedding girl was visibly troubled when she met us. We just thought it was nerves and all that. Wedding day comes, and she comes out in her full wedding gown with an absolute bitch face. Like I'm about to murder someone kind of bitch face. I'm not even kidding, lol. Never smiled once during the whole ceremony and the dinner. She loosened up a bit in the after party, and my girlfriend went and asked if she was okay. She waved my girlfriend away. Right after the wedding, she went back to Hong Kong for work, claiming there's shit she needs to do. Then COVID hit and we're practically not allowed to travel anywhere for a year or two. We were worried about her marriage, but she was always rather evasive, not answering our questions or just shooting the shit whenever we talked about it. Our circle of friends learned not to ask about it anymore. Fast forward 5 years until now, it turns out that she never actually got married. The ceremony and everything was a show. We gathered that the dude probably had another girlfriend in Singapore, and she only found out right before the wedding. But then she never said it out loud. Hinted it here or there with some close friends of hers. Shit's unreal. 6 or 7 of us with a 4-year-old kid flew to Singapore just to witness a show of a wedding. One of my best friends got married. None of us had met her before, but we hadn't seen him in years and were super excited to reconnect. This was the most elaborate wedding I had ever been to. Tuxes, an incredible meal, a hall that resembled Hogwarts, an opera performance, and a string quartet playing his favorite rap songs. It was incredible. Yet we just knew it wasn't him. We started to mingle with her friends at a table, and we soon learned they didn't really know her. We brushed it off as we just wanted to be there for him and have a good time. That was until the mother of the bride made a harmless joke about the bride being difficult as a child. This led to the bride eventually storming off after the dances, locking herself in a room, getting blackout and berating him, his family, and many guests who had flown across the country to be there. It all started to click that she was just absolutely psycho. Most of the guests caught the vibe and left by 9:30 p.m. Me and my friends eventually sat with her friends and shut down the party, from 150 guests down to 8. Why would we let everything go to waste? He quickly came over after he was able to calm her down and apologized to us and left. We honestly thought we'd never see him again. 6 weeks later, he called me. He had returned home. They were done. The story just has so many layers to it. Looking back, in the one day we had been around the situation, there was so many red flags. Thankfully, we have him back, and he's thriving. I'm not sure, but the thank you card from my gift arrived on the day I found out they were divorced. 2 weeks at most. I'm offering up this one because it actually ultimately has a happy ending. I got to know a guy in my hometown who had a wife from somewhere abroad. Every time I was around at his house, she'd glare at him, refuse to speak to or acknowledge me, and just walk around like the physical incarnation of a thunderstorm. She was the exact same toward everyone else as well. When I asked my friend about this, he admitted she didn't really like where they lived, that being a town in the UK. And in fairness, it was not the nicest area of town by a very long shot, but he seemed oblivious to this. Their apartment was great, but the area around it looked like a set from The Walking Dead. That marriage lasted 6 months. When I asked him after why they got married, he told me he thought that since he was now, at that time, 30 years old, he should probably settle down, which is the daftest reason to get married anyone's ever given me. Then, this happened, told to me by him after the fact. From time to time, he'd get emails from an old friend of his, a girl who had been a part of his circle of friends when he was younger, and who had since returned home to Asia. When she learned he'd married, her emails dried up for a few years. Just days after his divorce, she got back in touch for the first time in a long time, and he wrote back with the news he was divorced. 3 days later, she flew halfway around the world to see him. They became a couple after a couple of days, married 1 year later, and now have 3 kids, and live in a much nicer area. I'll start. The bride and groom got married at 20, and the bride's dad asked her to return his credit card during his speech because she can't use daddy's money now that she's married. He then ran over and started cutting his own credit card while the DJ played Rich Girl. My friend's mom got married to a trucker, was a pretty nice guy, treated her well, took care of her financially. About a year and his other 3 wives from other states group called her to inform her that he was also married to all of them as well. They all divorced him at the same time. Nothing was even finalized yet, and he was sitting at a bar drinking. A fight broke out between other people, and he got shoved off his bar stool. Hit his head pretty good, went home to sleep it off, and never woke up. I live in a small town in Switzerland, so everybody knows everybody. A couple was to marry on Saturday. The guest came along, and while they were greeted, the bride excused herself. She left to suck of a former male friend of her one last time and got caught. We used to joke about her blowing of the wedding. This thing happened years ago, but the both are still living in our town separatively, and I can't unhear the story when I see them. It's so weird how many stories there are about sexual activities at the wedding. It's not a very conducive environment. Aren't they kind of busy? A week before the wedding, the bride walked in on the groom f***ing the dog's stuffed toy. They went through with the very elaborate wedding, and I'm pretty sure it's because she wanted a wedding, not a marriage, in the first place. They annulled the marriage 2 weeks later. Her parents are still paying off the wedding debt, and that happened 5 years ago. Well, at least it wasn't the dog he was fucking. That would have been worse for sure. I was going to be best man at a friend's wedding. We got together the evening before the wedding, and all seemed well. Then, at 7:30 the next morning, I got a phone call from my friend. He said that the wedding was called off, and he would call and explain later. He didn't. It was 2 weeks later. I finally got a hold of his dad, and he said that his son was away at boot camp and wouldn't be coming back. I never heard from him or the bride again, so I don't really know what happened. She was way hotter than my cousin, by like a lot. She was also it was nicer than him, like a lot, so she left him. I still don't know why she married him in the first place. She made more than he does. So it wasn't looks, personality, or money. Went to a wedding that the bride's parents spent $30,000 for. 1 month later, the husband got a better job in a city 90 minutes away. The wife didn't want to move that far from her parents. They were divorced less than 2 months of marriage. The relationship between the bride's father and the groom was contentious from before the wedding. At it, one of the bride's cousins plus one had a dress with a cleavage, and one of the groom's cousins, drunk off his ass, came to her and told her he wanted, ad verbatim, to suck her boobs. Plus, one tells her date, who promptly punches the groom's cousin. This begins a full-on family versus family brawl that culminates with the groom punching the bride's father and this man taking his daughter away and keeping her away from her husband for 10 days. It got annulled. Can't imagine why. My very sweet and adorable cousin has epilepsy. We really liked her boyfriend turned fiance, and they seemed like a great match. We were all confused when she divorced him a year after their wedding. Turns out, after they were officially married, a switch flipped inside him and he became very emotionally abusive and manipulative. He would hold her epilepsy medication hostage in order for her to do whatever he asked. He was so psychologically abusive. As soon as she gathered enough courage to leave him, it's been amazing seeing her recovery to being her authentic, free self again after him. There was a young lady working with me who was caught texting her boyfriend on the wedding day. She had even sent him herself in her wedding dress. Witnessed by my parents, not me. During the wedding reception, someone asked the bride and groom when they were going to have kids. They had been dating for 8 years before getting married, so everyone assumed they were going to have kids immediately after getting married. The groom loudly said, "Oh man, I'm never having kids." The bride burst into tears and had to go to the restroom. They lasted about a year. You'd think that's something they would have talked about during that long time, but who knows. A few weeks later, the bride drove to her parents' house after work instead of her home and said she didn't want to be married anymore and asked them to fix it. Another one, bride left months later because groom's drug use had quickly spiraled out of control. My friend is a wedding photographer in Australia, and she had a couple where the groom was visibly recoiling from the bride in every photo. She couldn't get a photo of him looking comfortable or happy around his bride. No idea what was going on, but they didn't last long. One, the groom f***ed a bridesmaid at the reception, got caught behind the bar. Another, bride f***ed the best man in the limo on the way to the reception because the groom rode with his parents in the second limo. The limo driver told the groom. She had a baby she never bonded with. Shortly thereafter, she was diagnosed with bipolar disorder and hospitalized for months. When she was released, he went to court to get an order mandating that she only be allowed to see her child with another adult present. They mutually decided at that point to end the marriage. He now has full custody of the child, and she has limited visitation rights. Sad story. My cousin got married pretty early into a relationship in her early 20s. It was a very simple wedding, as not much could be afforded. They had the groom's 12-year-old cousin be the photographer because I was a bridesmaid. When cutting the cake, my cousin fed the piece of cake to her new husband and did the usual little show, but didn't make that big of a mess. It was his turn. He absolutely tried to smash it into my cousin's face. They got divorced. I can't remember how long after the wedding that was, but maybe at least a year later. Now she's remarried and seems very happy. They're on holiday right now. I'll be able to meet him in roughly 2 months. From what I've gathered with these types of marriage questions on Reddit, a number of commenters pointed out that couples they've seen do the cake in the face stunt at a wedding often get divorced early in the marriage. It's almost like a standard indicator that things won't last. In contrast to some others here, this couple lasted long, a full 6 months, until she confessed to cheating on him, repeatedly, with several men for several years, sometimes with multiple men at the same time. Dude was a mess for a year after that. My good friend and college roommate got married to his high school sweetheart as he was working through grad school. It was a beautiful wedding, but a few of us noticed the lack of enthusiasm on the face of the bride. Fast forward to the honeymoon, and he had planned fun little couples excursions for each day of the trip. She wouldn't go on any of them, and insisted on staying in the room reading books. After the third day of her staying in, he went to the pool bar and chatted with the bartender and other guests for a few hours before returning to the room. She accused him of drunkenly knocking her over during an attempted hug, followed by her ranting through tears about how she should never have married him. She booked an early flight home, and the annulment was already underway by the time he returned 2 days later. Turns out, she had been voicing her concerns about getting married for months before the big day, and her father's Searer family and my buddy had persuaded her to go through with it. Her initial story upon returning was that he had thrown her down, but within a week, she had come clean that it was definitely an accident, which we all knew. BC, my friend, is one of the kindest and gentlest people I know. He's remarried to a lovely woman and has a young daughter, and his ex is traveling the world. Moral of the story is not to marry someone who clearly doesn't want to get married. The bride had a very Instagram wedding, and it was quite over the top. She had 2 different dresses, videographer who made it look like it was a film. Turns out the groom had been sleeping with the maid of honor for 6 months prior to the wedding, and it was found out when the MOH was crying, saying, "This should have been me," at the party afterwards. Cake tasted absolutely incredible though. 10 out of 10. My grandmother was married before she met my grandfather. This is back in the 1950s. I've only heard the story once or twice, but she was 17 and he was in his 20s. She was dirt poor in Kentucky and he had a job. They got married, and within a few weeks, he got pretty rough with her. When she told her parents, it came to light that he'd been abusive for a while. Her dad and brothers didn't know her new husband as well as they'd like, since he was going to be part of the family and all, so they invited him on a hunting trip. Anyway, there was some kind of accident, and the guy got shot. Since he'd been in the service and she was his widow, my grandmother got some veterans benefits for the rest of her life. Shortly thereafter, when she was 19 to 20, she met my grandfather, and they were married just a few months shy of 50 years. One of the most compatible couples I've ever met. Wedding was fine, but then the groom tried to throw the bride off the balcony of the penthouse apartment they were staying in on the wedding night. I know this because I was a bridesmaid, and she called me and another bridesmaid and asked us to stay the night with them in their hotel room. Super awkward, but she assured us it wasn't a sexual thing. Turns out she didn't feel safe being alone with him, rightly so. They hid it well in public. He seemed like a decent guy until then, from what I had seen. Obviously that wasn't accurate. Why she married him, I'll never know. I guess she was afraid of what he'd do if she said no. Wife got pregnant unexpectedly. Her rich family freaked out, called in all their connections to pull a $100,000 wedding and reception within a few weeks. Wife had a miscarriage after 6 months. A year later, they were divorced and their marriage annulled. Neither the wife nor the husband really wanted to marry, but they caved due to pro-life family pressure. I think they would have made a go of it had they had the kid, but once that was out of the picture, the marriage fell pretty quickly. Thank you for watching. Write comments, put likes. Do not forget to watch other videos.